soap opera's about to start, so come on.
Miss JR.
Good morning. Thank you for being here with us, those in the audience, and welcome everyone else. We will begin our meeting. Our meeting is called to order, and we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Please join me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, let's see. We have public comment. Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one speaker this morning. Connie Jackson will address budget and end of year.
Good morning,
and
Ms. Jackson.
School board members and Mr. Superintendent. First, I'd like to address the budget. I just want to say thank you to Mr. Johnson and his whole department. I'm always amazed that I can't balance my checkbook, and yet they can balance $1 billion. The budget this year, as always, is tough, but this year, them being able to find ways to make everything fit, and as always, balance our budget. You hear of other districts, giving huge raises and stipends for this and that, and yet, what you have to always remember is that, one, either they don't have a balanced budget and are, spending from other areas or doing bonds or whatever, or they have a huge tax, that they don't, or they're one of the receiving and taking away our money. We won't go there. But I think that out in the schools, teachers are very excited about the raise this year, and there's really a great feeling. This is one of the best end-of-year times that I've ever seen. And again, Mr. Superintendent, when I'm out there, everybody's very excited about the fact that the superintendent is doing a great job. The one team, one goal has really made an impact. I know it's just words, but it's really felt out in the schools. And I'm really excited with where we're at as a district. I think that we've got great goals. We had great CCRPIs for the most part. We're beating the state and really every other district in almost everything. And it's a great time to be in Cobb County. And so I just wanted to say thank you to everyone involved, the district, the school board, and really to the superintendent. It's been a great year to be in Cobb, and I think next year will be even better. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ms. Jackson. That concludes public comments. All right, that brings us to approval of the minutes, and if there is no objection, the minutes are approved. That brings us to number 5, since there is no board business at this meeting. Superintendent's report, Mr. Ragsdale.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask Dr. Greg Ewing to come up and get ready for the presentation on CCRPI. We wanted to bring you up to date as a board. Over the past few years, CCRPI has gotten a lot of attention, obviously, and it's gotten a lot of attention for our district in that that is the governing tool and the measuring stick, if you will, for our IE squared contract with the state. That's what our schools are going to be held accountable for meeting goals attributed and tied to the CCRPI for each school. So we thought it was very important to not only update the board, but also really bring to light exactly what CCRPI is and what it is comprised of. And then, if we will, if we can wait till the end of the presentation for questions so that we can get through it, because Mary Elizabeth is going to come up and also contribute kind of after CCRPI is described and the scores are talked about, then she's going to come up and talk about what we're doing about it and what our next steps are. So, Dr. Ewing.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, and Mr. Superintendent. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board this morning regarding CCRPI. The Georgia Department of Education released the 2014-15 CCRPI data on May the 3rd. I would like to present to you now that data in detail. If you would be so kind as to hold your questions until the end of the presentation, when our newly anointed Dr. Mary Elizabeth Davis will join me as she explains what we are actually doing about the data that I'm presenting to you today. What is CCRPI? CCRPI is the College and Career Ready Performance Index. CCRPI is Georgia's educational accountability system. The index was developed as part of Georgia's waiver to the federal government's No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. The index is used by the Georgia DOE in many accountability-related decisions for schools and districts. For example, Title I schools are placed on the priority schools and focus schools list based on parts of the CCRPI. CCRPI is also a key component of our IE squared waiver with the Georgia DOE. One of our district's goals in the accountability section of the IE squared waiver is that our schools will demonstrate proficiency or improvement on the CCRPI. One of the differences between CCRPI and the accountability under the former No Child Left Behind Act of 2001 is that CCRPI rewards schools for helping every student maximize their academic performance. On the other hand, the No Child Left Behind Act tended to emphasize the lowest performing students, sometimes to the detriment of many other students in a school. What is the Office of Accountability? CCRPI is based on a massive amount of data gathered by all teachers and staff in our district. At the school level, administrators, teachers, and clerks all contribute to the state reporting that is reflected in CCRPI. At the district level, many staff in the Teaching and Learning Support and Specialized Services Division contribute data points to CCRPI. In particular, the Assessment Department plays an important role in administering the Georgia Milestones assessments. In my office, Dr. Isan Katula and his staff in the Office of Accountability oversee the CCRPI for our district. They serve as a resource to the Executive Cabinet, district supervisors, and principals to help all of us understand how decisions will impact CCRPI scores. They also educate principals and other district leaders on the intricacies of CCRPI and on the changes that occur to CCRPI from year to year. Dr. Katula also supervises the State and Student Reporting Department. This department, composed of a small staff of 6 people, support local schools to ensure that the data we report to the state is timely and accurate. In short, the task of reporting data upon which the CCRPI is based is a district-wide, year-long effort. How is CCRPI calculated? CCRPI is calculated based on a number of indicators that are grouped into components. Each of these components is assigned a number of points. The total number of points for CCRPI is 100. Schools and districts can also earn up to 10 bonus points, so-called challenge points. Therefore, schools and districts theoretically could receive a CCRPI score greater than 100. However, with our IE squared contract with the State Department of Education and subsequent achievement goals, we can't use challenge points in order to demonstrate school growth. The achievement component in CCRPI has 3 parts that measure how well students did in the current academic year. Those parts are content mastery, post-readiness, and graduation rate. In total, the achievement component accounts for 50 of 100 points. The progress component measures the amount that students grow in a school year and is worth 40 of the 100 points. The achievement gap component measures how well the lowest performing 25% of students in a school do relative to the average student in Georgia. The achievement gap component accounts for 10 of the overall 100 points on the CCRPI score. One useful feature of the CCRPI score is that it is a yardstick that is used to rate the performance of individual schools, school districts, and the state. At all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high, the index is calculated in the same manner and on the same 100-point scale. Therefore, Schools can compare their performance to the district, to other Georgia districts, and to the state as a whole. What were the major changes to the 2014-2015 CCRPI? The Georgia DOE made several major changes to the way that the CCRPI is calculated in 2014-2015. The first major change is that the assessments upon which the CCRPI are based are new. The 2014-15 CCRPI is based on the Georgia milestones, which were first given during the 2014-15 school year. For the first 3 years of CCRPI, the index was based on the CRCT and the EOCT assessments. The Georgia milestones have proven to be more challenging assessments for all students statewide, and this has had an impact on CCRPI scores. This change alone means that it is difficult to accurately compare scores from the 2014-15 school year to the previous 3 years of data. The second major change for CCRPI for the 2014-15 school year is now the assessment results are weighted according to how well the students in a school perform. In previous years on the CCRPI, if students simply passed the CRCT or the EOCT, then they were counted for CCRPI. Beginning this year, students who earned the top score on the milestones count 3 times more for CCRPI than those students who barely pass. This new method of weighting student scores is a significant difference from previous years. The third major change for the 2014-15 assessment of CCRPI is that the distribution of points among the 3 different categories in CCRPI is vastly different. Changes from the 2013-14 to the 2014-15 school years. This table that I'm showing you compares the point distribution for the components of CCRPI from 2014-15 and 2013-14. This is the same table that I showed you 2 slides ago, but I've added the distribution from 2013-14 and computed the difference between the 2 years. The highlighted column on the right shows the difference between 2013-14 and 2014-15. For example, the Achievement Content Mastery component is worth 20 points this year, but in the previous year it was worth 24 points. So the importance of this component has decreased by 4 points. Looking at all other components, it is clear that the state increased the progress component at the expense of all the other components. Progress, or what we call student growth, counts for 40 points of the overall CCRPI score and increased 15 points this year. The achievement component decreased by a total of 10 points, and the achievement gap component decreased by 5 points. What does all this mean? With the third change to CCRPI, the Georgia DOE is now rewarding schools more for growth rather than pure student achievement. This additional emphasis on student growth means that it is important for every student to learn as much as possible during the school year. I wanted to spend a few minutes explaining each of the components of the CCRPI in more depth. To help me do this, we invited 3 principals to explain some of these components via video and also explain a little about how they address those specific components at their school.
The graduation part of CCRPI is threefold: elementary, middle, and high school. The elementary and middle are predictors of graduation. Those students scoring proficient or above on the Georgia milestones would be a student who is likely to graduate. When you look at the high school, we break it into 4- and 5-year cohorts of students who enter 9th grade. The expectation is that they will graduate within that 4-year period, and then a percent of students who do graduate within that 4-year time will be your graduation rate. At Osborne High School, we've had a large gain in graduation rate and CCRPI. The teachers at our school have worked tremendously hard through the last 5 years. We have something called the Graduation Task Force, where we look at students individually by name, by who they are, and by what they need to graduate, and we design a plan to help them meet success and ultimately graduate.
The progress component of CCRPI is where we compare the student growth from one year to the next from students with similar academic peer groups. And an academic peer group is where a student the first year on a test scores a certain score, and then they will be compared to students with that same score the next year on the next test. And they'll be put into groups of high, typical, and low growth. And of course, we want all of our students to be in that typical or high growth. At Griffin, we try to reach every student, and we understand every student learns differently and at different times. So we try to find something for each. One is we did a Milestone Monday, which we abbreviated the schedule to give us an extra 90 minutes at the end of the day where we can work in different groups at different levels and using one-on-one with some students and PBLs or problem-based learnings with others. We also incorporated a 2-day spring break camp where we worked with students and added a component of exercise and athletics to it to try to inspire the students. We brought in a speaker, Tim Lester, former NFL player, who spoke to our students right before testing, every student. And 3 weeks later, those students can still tell you what Tim Lester talked about as far as always giving your best in everything. So we try to reach every student at every level, whether it's the students that come to us that are behind, or the students that are ahead that we want to move further.
The post-readiness achievement component with CCRPI encompasses several elements. One being the access testing, and it looks at the number of kids who move bands or performance levels on the access testing. Another element is our number of kids in 3rd and 5th grade who are meeting or exceeding reading standards, or basically reading on grade level. That gives us a prediction of how well they'll do in middle school. And then a third component are those kids in 1st through 5th grade who complete their career awareness cluster. And then a final component is that we look at those students' attendance, those students who are absent less than 6 days. We address CCRPI at Clarkdale by looking at those critical areas that we needed to focus on. With a clear understanding of what CCRPI is all about, with the help of the accountability department here at Cobb County, we looked at our attendance and really took a strong focus on working on our attendance and having kids get to school. Last year, we had about 354 kids of our 700 who were absent over 6 days. So we really focused on getting kids to school and getting them to school on time. Once we addressed our attendance issue, we looked at those critical subject areas that we needed to focus on. And one of our foci at Clarkdale, math. And so we brought in tutors, we extended our instructional time at Clarkdale, we incorporated a math lab, we reduced all of our class sizes so that we can have a smaller pupil-teacher ratio. And with all those efforts and just a hard-working team, dedicated staff, and parents who are willing to do what it takes to move our kids, we were able to achieve some great results.
From their comments, it is clear that improving CCRPI is a school-wide effort. Note that the initiatives that the principals mentioned are the types of initiatives that any good school leader is going to implement in their building to try and help students become successful. Now, for the 3 components that the principals in the video did not mention, the content mastery component of the achievement is based on the performance of students on the Georgia Milestones exam. The achievement gap component is based on the performance and the growth of the lowest performing 25% of students in a school building. And challenge points, which I would like to discuss next. What are challenge points? Challenge points are awarded for 2 different areas: subgroup student performance and exceeding the bar. Subgroup performance is based on the performance of the Georgia Milestones given in grades 3 through 12 for 3 specific subgroups of students: English learners, economically disadvantaged students, and students with disabilities. Exceeding the bar points are awarded for several indicators, such as implementing innovative practices in a school to encourage college and career readiness, An example would be implementing a positive behavior interventions and support, or PBIS program, in an elementary, middle, or high school. Another example is completing a career portfolio by the end of the 5th grade. A third example is the percent of students passing world language courses in elementary and middle school, or earning 3 credits of foreign language in a high school. And another example would be 95% of graduates earning credit in a physics course in high school. Why do we have no CCRPI scores for our primary schools? One result of the changes to the CCRPI is that our primary schools will not receive CCRPI scores for 2014-2015. The Georgia DOE has not determined whether or not they will receive CCRPI scores for 2015-2016. Much of the CCRPI is based on the Georgia milestones, but the milestones are not administered to students in grades K through 2. Therefore, the CCRPI as currently implemented is difficult to apply to schools that only have K through 2 students. Now I would like to shift from talking about what CCRPI is to how did our Cobb schools do on the 2014-2015 CCRPI. A comparison of CCSD to the state. This table shows Cobb's CCRPI score and the state score for the 4 years that CCRPI has been calculated. Please note that Cobb's score for 2014-15 school year was 79.7, which is 4.2 points higher than the state average. 2011-12 was the first year for CCRPI, and the CCRPI has been redefined, refined, and modified each year. However, because of all the changes that I mentioned before regarding the 2014-15 CCRPI score, it is not advised to compare the 2014-15 scores directly to previous years. However, I still wanted you to have an idea of how the district's score has changed with time as we calculated the difference between Cobb's score and Georgia's score, and this difference is shown in the highlighted column on the far right table. Looking at the different columns, Cobb has exceeded the state in all 4 years of the CCRPI. For the last 3 years, Cobb averaged 4 or 5 points above Georgia's score. The larger difference in 2011-12 is attributed, at least in part, to 2011-12 being the first year of CCRPI baseline data. On the whole, our performance as a district relative to the state has been very consistent over time. Let's now study a dot plot graph. I also wanted to show you how Cobb performed relative to some of the other Metro Atlanta school districts. In the plot shown on the horizontal axis along the bottom line is a number for the CCRPI score ranging from 65 to 85 points. We have then placed a dot corresponding to the CCRPI score for each district, and we've highlighted Cobb and Georgia by giving them a different color. Some districts are slightly below Cobb, while others are below the state average. Let's now look at Cobb compared to the metro area. Cobb is also at the top among metro districts in the components of CCRPI. Cobb scored 34 out of a possible 50 points in the achievement category. Cobb also has 35.4 out of 40 points for the progress component. Combining the scores from the achievement and the progress components, Cobb has the highest average in the metro area. For the achievement gap component, Cobb received 6.7 points out of 10, which is tied for the top among the metro districts. Let's now look at performance by level. Another helpful component of CCRPI scores is the ability to study the district's performance by level. This table shows performance for elementary, middle, and high compared to the state for 2014-15. Our elementary schools are slightly above the state average. However, our middle schools and high schools are more than 7 points above the state average. One explanation for elementary school CCRPI scores remaining slightly above the state average is that the scores used to obtain the CCRPI calculations focused on the Georgia milestones, which, if you remember, are more rigorous and different exams at the elementary level, as they now contain for the first time for our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders constructive response questions. It is expected that as we continue to implement the superintendent's initiative, which focuses on reading and math at all levels, that these scores will improve. Who are the most improved schools? I want to turn now to highlight the performance of some individual schools within the district. This slide shows the most improved schools on the CCRPI from the 2013-14 school year to the 2014-15 school year. Because of the changes to the 2014-15 CCRPI, determining the most improved school is not as simple as just comparing the scores from the last 2 years. So to make the comparison more valid, we looked at the improvements from 2014-15 to 2013-14 based on the state percentile increase for each school. Clarkdale is one elementary school which increased by 35 percentage points. This means that in 2013-14, Clarkdale's score was in the 11th percentile among elementary schools in the state, meaning that their score was better than 11% of the elementary schools in the state. However, in 2014-2015, Clarkdale was in the 46th percentile, meaning that their score is better than 46% of elementary schools in the state. So Clarkdale increased 35 percentage points from the 11th percentile to the 46th percentile. Lindley's 6th grade increased 46 percentage points from the 23rd percentile in 2013-14 to the 70th percentile in 2014-15. And Osborne High School increased 24 percentage points from the 12th percentile to the 36th percentile. All of the schools on this slide increased by at least 15 percentage points. Using the percentile ranking measure of improvement, 30 of 64 elementary schools with CCRPI scores improved from 2013-14 to 2014-15. 18 of 25 middle schools improved, and 10 of 16 high schools improved from the 2013-14 to the 2014-15. The superintendent commends these schools for their performance. And now, what are the top performing schools in our district? All of the schools on this list had a 2014-15 CCRPI score of 90 or higher. Soap Creek Elementary School, their score is 94.5 and is in the top 2% of elementary schools in the state. Mount Bethel at 94.2 is in the top 3% of elementary schools in the state. Dodgen Middle School at 98.4 is the 4th highest middle school in the state. Hightower Trail at 96.5 is in the top 2% of middle schools in the state. Lassiter High School at 98.7 was the highest non-magnet high school in the state. And Walton High School at 96.8 is the 5th highest non-magnet high school in the state. In summary, Cobb performed well on the 2014-15 CCRPI. The College and Career Ready Performance Index, because of the way it is structured, encourages us to enable all of our students to become college and career ready. If we are to build on this strong performance of CCRPI, we need to enable students to perform their best on state assessments and in the classroom to move all of our students toward high school graduation and beyond. Lastly, I want to say thank you to the board for your leadership and your interest in this topic, and to the superintendent for allowing me the opportunity to stand in front of you this morning and present this information. Mr. Superintendent, at this time I'm going to ask Dr. Mary Elizabeth Davis to join me at the podium and explain what the district is now doing with all of this data.
All right, well, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent. So I'm really here to ask that very basic question. What here in Cobb County are we doing based on the CCRPI outcomes that we just learned? After following such a substantive presentation, it's really important that we actually focus on how this data is contributing to our discussion on how we continuously improve. There's so much to celebrate, as was highlighted in the last slides, but there's also very specific and concerning reasons that we focus on areas where we have not shown the greatest of improvements that we would prefer. As you heard from Dr. Ewing, the CCRPI calculation is complex, and at the risk of oversimplifying it, I want to focus on some of the conditions under which these particular values are evolved. So, for example, as I begin, keep in mind that in addition to the CCRPI formula changing every single year in the most recent years, we have also had a different series of student assessments, most recently called the Georgia Milestones, that we have given in the recent years. In other words, there is absolutely no way for us to monitor trend performance over the recent years or for us to compare from one year to another. And I caution our conversation from leaning too heavily on any type of comparison from previous year performances. So keep in mind that in 2014-15, which was last school year, we had the first administration of the Georgia Milestones. And that was on the heels of a very volatile discussion about pulling out of Park. So we had a lot of disruption in the whole assessment field and a lot of unknowns as we went into the 2014-15 school year. In the 2013-14 school year, 2 years ago now, it was based on the administration of CRCTs and EOCTs. We were very comfortable with those assessments, very familiar with them, and had really become very acclimated to what students were expected to do at the conclusion of a year. And then, of course, we could continue to go back further and talk about additional changes that has continuously impacted the CCRPI number. So I don't want to focus too much on our milestone administration. However, because milestones are a key contributor to CCRPI, let's take a look at the 2014-15 state milestone administration. The presentation slides are in front of you in case you need a closer view of this particular one. But let's talk about last year. You may remember that the state of Georgia had committed to being a part of the Park Consortium. And after a very political debate, pulled out of that Park Consortium, changing the landscape of our anticipated assessments entirely. In addition, throughout the course of the 2014-15 school year, the state made changes to the assessments, longer assessments, a writing component, constructed response, and an extended response, including in mathematics. The state also made significant changes to the administration structure. There were new answer documents that were very unfamiliar and released very late in the school year. There was a new online system that actually created tremendous technical implications from the state perspective, a new format, and there was no retest available to students who did not perform above grade level immediately. Additionally, we went into the 2014-15 school year with no information about the Georgia Milestones. We did not have assessment guides, we did not have student study guides from the state, and we really had a delayed availability of even sample items. So as we headed into a milestone administration with such little clarity, we've got to have that narrative and context behind the numbers that may have resulted in our most recent CCRPI. That doesn't mean Cobb didn't try to really take control of how we prepared for the milestones, and we did have a lot of effort in the technical preparations. How do you inform schools on what the test is going to look like? How do we structure our testing schedule? How do we prepare for kids to practice in this online environment? And we also created a lot of training opportunities through our Milestone Messenger, and that was for communication to principals and to teachers regarding how to prepare best for with the limited information we know for milestones. It cannot be overstated the heavy lift of our district team last year, led by Gretchen Walton, our Director of Assessment, our Technology Services team, led by Dr. Bacon, and our leaders and teachers, led by Dr. Rivera, to implement an entirely new assessment system. So, as we concluded our very inaugural administration, we headed into this school year. We have had a lot of candid conversations here in this boardroom about the gaps in our instructional processes and how we have focused on simplifying our foundation for teaching and learning. So this past year, we have made substantial improvements to the systems and processes that are in place in order to ensure that every child is learning every single day. Let's just start with the instructional processes. We've talked about the Cobb commitment. We've shared with our community the Cobb commitment. But this year, we have focused on teaching the standards, a balanced approach to math and ELA, and a focus on engagement. Probably even more substantial is our introduction of formative assessment and diagnostic tools. You recall that we have begun administering a reading and mathematics diagnostic to every single child in every single grade level from K through 9. That has given us information during the course of the year to make adjustments in our instruction in preparation for this spring administration of the milestones. We also launched a full formative assessment system for both math and English language arts. So our teachers were able to ensure that students were mastering their learning throughout the course of the year, as opposed to waiting till we give a summative assessment administered by the state in the spring. I also want to emphasize the availability of our student performance through the CTLS system that we've also had several discussions about here in our boardroom. Teacher resources improved tremendously this past year, including a full portfolio of math lesson plans for every grade level for every teacher. School leadership, led by Dr. Rivera, focused their data conversations with every principal on where math and ELA performance was throughout the year incrementally. And I've really got to pause to applaud our technical preparations. I'm sure you have followed the news as closely as I have with the technical disruptions that have occurred around the state this spring administration. And here in Cobb County, we can proudly report that we did not experience that same technical disruption that every other district has been reporting. And that is due to one sole reason: the leadership of our Technology Services Division. Their involvement and engagement in preparing our schools to compensate and overcompensate for state deficiencies equipped our teachers and our leaders to administer our assessments in a digital environment with very, very little disruption. I applaud Dr. Angie Bacon and her team for their tireless efforts. This doesn't come without burden. This does not come free of charge. There were field techs who were working 14 plus hours a day, several consecutive days through weekends, in order to ensure that technology did not disrupt the experience of assessment. And I believe that that is a very big difference as we head into the next year's CCRPI. Let me conclude by talking about how we're already laying the groundwork with 2016-17 preparation for milestones. I believe last year we really organized our processes and systems and we communicated them. This coming year, it's about implementing with fidelity from school to school and monitoring. And so I want to just emphasize that we will improve our infrastructure for data teaming at our local school, so we're really making very personalized decisions for our student learning. Our teacher resources will continue to evolve, including a portfolio of digital professional learning videos and a portfolio of locally developed resources in math and ELA. We're going to launch this summer the Summer Learning Link, and that is what you might remember, the summer packets of old, where you walk out of 3rd grade with your summer packet of everything you should do and know by the time you get to 4th grade, which will now be a full digital portfolio for parents and students to access over the summer. And our technical preparations will continue to be very closely involved. Now, I wanted to make sure I did not accidentally suggest that milestones play more of a role than is appropriate in the CCRPI calculation. It's a key contributor, but it's certainly not the only contributor in that complex formula. So as we think about advancing our CCRPI outcomes, we can recognize that our only reason for not being the top performing district in Metro Atlanta was because of the challenge points. Now, our priority this year has been to simplify the foundation to prepare for innovation. Well, now we're ready. It is time for us to tackle challenge points. It's time for us to lead the state in challenge points. And as you can see on the screen, some of the examples that Dr. Ewing discussed regarding our opportunities that we left on the table in challenge points. That concludes my component of the presentation today. It would be most appropriate, however, to applaud the leadership of our local schools and the tireless effort of our teachers in order to really focus on how student learning is the #1 priority in our organization. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Ewing.
Madam Chair, that concludes our presentation, and Dr. Davis and I are here for questions, should the board have any.
Thank you both. Excellent presentations. Also, thanks to our three principals who were highlighted in our video. That was great. I'd like to point out that two of those were from my post, but that's an aside. But anyway, thanks to everyone for all the efforts that they're making on this. One of my questions was, first of all, how does transiency impact our scores? Is that a question that can be answered relatively easily?
Well,
And the reason I'm asking that is when you're talking about achievement gaps and when we don't have some of these students in our schools, does that impact them or not?
we're going to verify this data, but I think you have to be present 65% of the school year. The number may have gone up a little higher. So when we report those scores to the state, every score is reported, but in order for it to count, the child had to be actually in the school classroom a certain percentage of time, and we'll get you that exact number.
Well, and that's fine, but the main thing I was thinking was if we're doing achievement gap, so achievement gap's done from the school standpoint. It's the bottom 25%. It's not individual individual students. So we're not measuring a student's last year's performance to this year's.
That's right.
It's the bottom 25% that we're getting the achievement gap. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. That is
Okay.
correct.
All right, thank you. Okay. Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to echo the sentiments of our chair in terms of the presentation. I typically gauge the quality of a presentation by how many questions are answered prior to this. And I mean, you checked off a lot of different boxes for me in terms of questions that I had. I have a few questions, Madam Chair. First is, in your professional opinion, Dr. Ewing, do you think that the CCRPI is a good measuring stick of the actual performance of a school?
When we look and review the literature, and when we think of, and I think of my 30 years in education, for us, it's the only stick that we have that's approved by the state. It's what's going to be published by the state, and it's what we have to live by. So I think for us, we would be prudent to try to understand that measurement fully as best we can, then to go into schools and teach principals everything we know about it, and to teach them how to, if I were a teacher, I'd say I want to teach you how to take the test, how to meet the requirements of that test. There are things that change from year to year. That begins to cause us issues because we can't compare from year to year, and every year the scoring process changes for us. So those are some challenges we have, but in all, based on what we have, we do the best we can with it, and our goal is to really show principals how that instrument works and to make them understand what they can do with students in their school to score as best as they can.
Did that
No, I have a few more questions. No, he up there being politically correct, right? That's what he's doing, right? You can talk to us, man. Like, for real, talk to us. Like, I will say this. I think that it is a drastic improvement because what you would hear is you can't take a single test score, of a test score and say this school is high performing and this school is low performing. And in my mind, in carefully listening to what the two of you had to say, though complex in terms of how they calculate the score, it seems to me that the CCRPI is really hitting on pressure points such as, okay, we're going to take some from just how you did on the milestones. We're going to measure growth and give you challenge points. So to me, if it's a wide breadth of taking in what's happening at a school, then it seems to me that it very well could be a good reflection in terms of how a school is performing. That was a bit more of a commentary, but the second question I have is this, and I mentioned this to Chris. I heard Dr. Liz Maynard at Clarkdale Elementary, since we're throwing out kudos, Madam Chair, Clarkdale is in the South Cobb area, about do we share information as a district? Okay, in this sense, because the question I posed to Chris was, do we have standard, like, do we have a universal way of approaching issues, challenge points, or things of this nature? So I heard Dr. Liz Maynard talking about attendance. So do we as a district say we have common practices regardless to where you might fall on the spectrum of what your challenges might be as a school to improve your CCRPI score, whether it's achievement points or growth? Do we have common practices that we use or that we communicate to principals around the district around these are practices that we found to be successful at other schools that we think you should use at your school?
Sure. That's an easy question for us. One of the first things we did 2 years ago when the superintendent placed us in the positions we're in is Dr. Katula made a visit to every single principal and every single building. We disaggregated the data of the building to show the principal where you can improve. So we gave them as much information as we could on their data. Then, utilizing the one team, one goal approach, Dr. Rivera and Mary Elizabeth get tired of seeing my face every day because I come to them daily and I say, here's the data, here's what we're seeing. Now, what practices can we put from teaching and learning? And then Dr. Rivera, being the person who supervises principals, here's what you and your assistant superintendents need to know that's occurring in buildings. So we do that very much on a weekly basis here. And we're proud to say we've met with every single principal. And our goal is to show them what the data looks like, to show them where they're trending in areas that could show improvement. And then we begin to pull out resources, whether it's from the teaching and learning side of the second floor or whether it's from the leadership side downstairs.
Let me jump in too, because I appreciate the question because, however, what drove us to go with IE squared kind of answers that question in a way, because there are no two schools alike in our district, regardless of level or what have you. And so when we start looking at performance levels, then what we do in order to improve those levels of performance is really specific to the school. Even if two schools had attendance issues, they might address those issues in totally different ways. Now, Dr. Maynard at Clarkdale, that's probably one of the most energetic interviews I've ever done when I interviewed her for the final interview for Clarkdale. And she carries that energy throughout her leadership. And you heard in the video her talk about that it's really the team at Clarkdale that's come together, that's working hard to do that. Matter of fact, we were talking about an example of how they did meet and greet. They actually had school buses and the teachers went to the neighborhoods to do the meet and greet. Liz understands her community and understands how to engage in her community. While I would love to be able to say, here's the template to improve CCRPI. We just can't do it because every school is different.
Well, I certainly agree with that. I'm not saying that it's a robotic exercise, but what I'm asking is, if you have school X in South Cobb, that if you look at just this year's score, because you can't compare previous years based upon the changes, is there a conversation like, hey, I'm not saying you have to use this, but I'm just letting you know that these are some common successful practices that have improved this particular thing at a school with a like transiency rate, demographics. Are those type of conversations saying, hey, Jane Doe, John Doe, at principal at this school, I'm not saying you have to do this, that's your discretion because you're the principal, but these are some practices that we found to be successful that you might want to include in how you approach a given issue. Are those type of conversations taking place? I guess that might drill down a little bit more in terms of what I'm asking.
Sure.
In response to that, I want you to know that those conversations are happening not only across level meetings for all elementary, middle, and high school when the principals come together. They happen in L&L meetings with our different divisions really speaking with one voice. I'll go most importantly, one of the things that we have done this year as we look at trend data provided by Dr. Ewing and Dr. Catula is we are meeting in small groups with principals who share like achievement data to come together and say, what are the best practices that we can share as a group to move this forward? So those are, and I can speak very specifically, so Dr. Walters Brazil throughout the year will meet in small groups with principals where we see patterns and relative to CCRPI data to make sure we're having similar conversations with similar data to make sure we're getting exceptional growth.
Excellent. Just a couple more, Madam Chair, I promise. Thank you, Grant. That is great information. Dr. Davis, did y'all catch the doctor? I didn't call her Mary's Elizabeth anymore. The summer learning link, is that something, it's two-part, is that something that's happening this summer, or will it be available next summer? And is it universal? Like with a third grader at Cheatham Hill, would it be the same thing as third grader at Bryant? And also, will that summer link give parents and students the opportunity to be prepared for that diagnostic that they're going to be taking coming into the fourth grade? And will that also encompass, the milestones type of information? That's my next question.
So, Mr. Morgan, you've actually been so influential in your leadership in addressing what is our summer strategy through your Summer Bridge initiative, and also at probing questions like what is available for parents to know what should my child have mastered by the conclusion of third grade, and what should my child be ready to do as we start fourth grade. So what you will find in the Summer Learning Link is an articulation of what you want to shore up that your child did successfully master as a third grade completer, and what are some things to do as you prepare for what will meet expectations in fourth grade. It will be closely linked to math and reading, which is our diagnostic tool, and it will be very closely linked to student choice, parent choice, based on what were gaps from your diagnostic at the conclusion of third grade. And let me clarify, it is a K-5 for this summer, and 6 and beyond will be in future summers.
Gotcha. Last question, Madam Chair. Thank you. That I saw on here, Mary Elizabeth, where you put, and this is a very personal story that I'm about to say. It's going to be a story and a question. 15-16 preparation for milestones. As some of you might know, my child's a third grader right now, elementary school. And I don't think this was a district issue, so I don't want anybody to think that it's that type of indictment. But one of the things I saw from a parent's perspective, especially third grade, have to take the milestones, was I felt like there was a gap between what was taught on a daily basis, not in terms of standards, but in terms of how the standards were delivered and how you would be expected as a student to see that information on the milestones. I felt like that was completely different from what was on them, or from the resources that I saw, what was actually on the milestones. I see on here where you put including paired passages. And I know the milestones, that's a big part of it is, 3 times 2 is 6, but you're gonna have to be able to write in a complete thought about that. So my question is, in terms of preparation for milestones moving forward, will benchmarks or tests that we're giving, will they be structured in such a way that a child will see these types of questions in the same format on the benchmarks as when I'm expected to do it in May on the milestones, to give that child enough acclimation that he or she can really show what they know, as opposed to, because some children, my child, is not necessarily one who can transition from, well, you've been showing it to me like this all year, and then I see it like this on the milestones. That throws her for a loop. So is that what is meant by paired passages in terms of how benchmarks will be administered district-wide moving forward?
So to give comfort not only to you as a parent, but to all of the parents who might be tuning in, that is exactly what we aim to provide for our teachers this coming year. This past year has been a ramping up of developing the systems, the processes, the examples, the samples, and really development year. And while it has become available to teachers and leaders throughout the course of the year, next year is when we are focused on implementation with fidelity, so that every child does have exposure to the types of learning outcomes that will be expected in a state-administered assessment. And I do want to actually suggest that that is very healthy, because the paired passages you're referencing are actually taking two pieces of literature and putting them next to each other. So that's actually a lot of reading for a kid in an assessment environment. And then there are questions that follow in which the student has to go back and reference and actually pull textual evidence out of those passages. For us to prepare children to do that successfully is actually a very good skill for kids to have. So this is an important part of the instructional process that we will embark on this coming year. And while it does also serve the purpose of preparing you for the assessment, that is not the only purpose we will accomplish by having more examples of that throughout the course of the year.
Finally, not a question, but again, thank you, Ms. Superintendent. You know the context I have sitting up here on the board. What I like the most about the presentation is thorough job done by you, Dr. Ewing, but also to come back with what it will be moving forward because of the challenges we have. Typically, school districts don't want to talk about that. They only want to talk about the highlights, but to spotlight the highlights in the schools is great, but also talk about where we will be moving forward because of challenges we've seen. Mr. Superintendent, that would not be happening if it weren't from your leadership. Again, thank you guys for answering all my questions. And Madam Chair, thank you for indulging me.
Thanks, Mr. Morgan. Did you need to say something, Mr.
Yeah, if I
Rosdale?
can, just follow up on that. And it's truly a team effort because, and I'm going to use the technology example, because it's not like the field techs that were working the 14-hour days wanted to do that. You know what I'm saying? But it's what we had to do. And literally at the high school level, those field techs were working 14-hour days for 2 weeks to make sure the setup was correct to be able to administer the test. Now, that being said, there were a lot of things pushed down to us, and that's what I want to say, and Mary Elizabeth mentioned that it did not come for free. Obviously, we had the time of our employees, but we also had to apply some different equipment that some districts may or may not been in a position that they could do that and turn that on a dime like we were able to do. But that being said, it speaks to going back to the first administration of Milestones. We didn't have the test before the school started, so we had no earthly idea what it was going to look like. That being said, we're not saying that we want to whine about it, but it is what it is, and then we need to do what we need to do to move forward and make sure we're successful. So to Mary Elizabeth's point, exactly, we acknowledge that students had a difficult time in transitioning from what was being taught in class to what was on the Milestones, and like she said, going through that exercise accomplishes multiple goals in that. So it's not just that we want to teach the test. We want to make sure that we're teaching the standards, but we also want to make sure the academic performance is accurately displayed on our performance on the assessment that the district and students and schools are going to be evaluated against, and thus teachers and principals will be evaluated against. So that's just what I wanted to say to follow that up.
Thank you. And I was probably remiss, we really should have started this off thanking and congratulating our high-performing schools and our schools on the list of most improved. That represents a great deal of work on everyone's part for those. So congratulations to all those schools. And Mary Elizabeth, do we need to put in our standard statement right now about we don't just teach to the test, to remind our community that this is not the end-all and be-all of our curriculum, but it is one measurement of our learning? Yeah. Okay, I believe we had other questions. Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Ewing and Mrs. Davis, for an excellent presentation. Very informative.
Dr. Davis.
Dr. Mrs.
Dr. Davis.
Is that doctor now?
Mary Elizabeth.
I thought it was Mrs., okay. Mrs., Dr. Mrs. Davis. First of all, I want to thank the students and congratulate the students for making these numbers possible. Also, I want to thank the teachers and the administrative staff at each school who also supported the students and gave them the instructional knowledge to make these scores possible. Also, I want to thank the administration for support of our schools and our staff. And most of all, I want to thank the parents who have supported their students and who have assisted them in making these numbers possible. Parents are the foundation, and we should never forget that. One of the questions, referring to what Mr. Morgan said a few minutes ago about raising the bar, I think the challenge that the superintendent and the administration has in the future is how to raise the bar higher. That's going to be your challenge. One of the questions I have is Senate Bill 364, which was introduced by Senator Lindsey Tippins, who was a board member in Cobb County for 12 years. And during that period of time, there was tremendous growth in the county. How will that affect our milestone assessments next year, if any?
Remember, Senate Bill 364, when we're looking at that, we're looking at the SLO assessments in classrooms. Milestones are the exams we give anyway in grades 3 through 12. So in elementary school, it's the tests students are going to take to show achievement. In high school, for certain courses, it's their what we used to call end of course test. So, sure.
I'm just going to add to Dr. Ewing's remarks to say that Senate Bill 364 actually does now eliminate the administration of science and social studies, with the exceptions of grades 5, 8, and aspects of high school. And so that does reduce our state administrated tests in 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th, and a little bit in high school. So we will see a reduction in state assessments. I think our community has been very vocal about the importance of that. I simultaneously want to ensure that we continue to bring value to the instruction of science and social studies in those grade levels. And so we will look at our internal mechanisms for ensuring instruction continues at high levels. But when it comes to May and we're doing lots of testing, we actually will begin to see a reduction in those state administered assessments, starting with science and social studies.
Okay, thank you. Going back to your comments about the challenge points, I noticed that innovative instructional models is referred to at each school level. Can you expound on what that really means?
Actually, what we're doing is we're pulling together now a sheet for all of the schools. We want to show the schools exactly what those steps could be. It's a very complicated process that the DOE has laid out. If you will allow us a couple of days, we'll have that ready and I'll share that with the board. Some of the things that we can think of, just as we used in our presentation, is when you offer foreign languages in elementary school, when you offer foreign language in middle school, when you take more than 2 required units in high school, when you offer physics to 95% of the students. But we're going to complete a sheet that will tell us all of the different innovative models that would be available. It'll take us a few days to comb through that data from the state, and then we'll share that with the board and with the principals, if that's okay. Also, I'd like to point out that for the second year in a row, Leicester High School is #1 in the scoring in Cobb County, under the direction and leadership of Dr. Chris Ritchie, who's an excellent principal. Couldn't ask for any better. Also, had 2 middle schools in the top scores. I'll point out one thing. The challenge points is where we were kind of deficient on as far as the score. If we had just matched Douglas County at 4.6, we would have been the top school district in the state. So hopefully next year
we'll be up at least higher than that.
Yes, sir. We're quite well aware of that, and actually, I heard that same conversation from the superintendent yesterday, so we're on it.
Well, he got it from me.
Okay, well, thank
Thank you,
you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Scammahorn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me start off, and in case the other board members don't need or want this, I can get with you later. As I was carefully going through this, and you were discussing the different aspects of the CCRPI, I didn't really get a handle on what achievement really is. And I assume the three sub-areas, content mastery, post-readiness, and graduation rate. I'm fuzzy on all of that. The other thing is the difference between achievement and progress. Student growth, does that mean I may be retained? And you can answer any of this or none of it, and I'll get with you later. But this is what I was kind of looking for as a foundation, and I assume most of our public is probably looking for a foundation too. And then same way with achievement gap and challenge points. I understood your presentation is very good, but I didn't have a good definitive foundation as to why we're looking at that. Then, oh, did you have a comment?
Well, I was going to say, if you're asking a question, then that means others have questions too. So if you'll give us 24 hours, we'll begin to pull something together, and we'll share not only with the board, but I'll certainly share with the principals as well,
Okay.
and we can explain that in greater detail.
Okay, and take whatever time you need.
Yes, sir.
And along that line too is flipping over to the chart where we're comparing the districts in achievement and progress.
Yes, sir.
If we're the second on the not if, we are the second on CCRPI, and I understand if my conclusion is correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, that these things keep changing, so it's kind of hard to nail down from year to year. But if Gwinnett County is our top school system, and our measurement is a perfect 100, is it realistic that any of us will get to 100?
We haven't seen any district reach that score yet.
And if it's not realistic, then should that be addressed at the state level where, hey, we can't get there from here? Nobody. No matter how much money, how much manpower, whatever. Am I wrong in that assessment, or do you?
I think that would be something that the board would want to look at and consider. That wouldn't be something we would consider in my office. I can tell you that from the metro area, 80.5 was the highest score coming out from the state on a scale of 100.
Okay.
Mr. Scammahorn, let me interject on that point, and Dr. Ewing, you correct me if I'm wrong, but on achievement test, it is kind of like an infinity. There's always room for improvement. So it's not like you're trying to make 100 as it would be in a performance-based, but on achievement, they're trying to determine what is your maximum achievement. Isn't that the difference in some of the scores?
The way the state set the scoring up, they set up a 100-point test, if you will, with 10 bonus points. As they have refined this, and we see them refining the scoring process each year of the 4 years, as they have refined the process, it appears that they're trying to find out what that definitive formula would be for districts. We haven't seen districts go anywhere near the 95 to 100 mark in any.
So as they're trying to find that, they would want to have a higher benchmark than we probably would achieve because they would, to see how far we can.
Yes, ma'am.
Right, so, I'm sorry. Sorry to
No,
interject there,
thank
Mr.
you.
Scammahorn.
We're looking for clarification and knowledge, so thank you, Madam Chair. Couple more quick questions. Dr. Davis said that throughout the year, although we don't teach to the test, but we have a number of formative and then a summative testing. Do we just have one summative testing, or is it at the end of each semester, or is it periodic during the year?
My use of the term summative testing was actually referring to the administration of the milestones as that summative culminating assessment of the entire instructional period. And the formatives are the classroom assessments that are happening as a part of the typical teaching and learning cycle that occurs daily throughout the course of the year. We have 2 specifically that are district delivered, and one has to do with the reading and math proficiency that we measure throughout the year, and the other has to do with the math and language arts content performance throughout the year. But teachers also have many other measures that they deploy to monitor their student growth throughout the year. But the summative is the state-administered assessment that I was referring to.
And that's typically at the end of the year then? Is that?
It's at the end of an instructional period, so in high school, if you are on a block schedule, you might conclude your economics course in December and take your summative assessment in December, move on to a new course for the spring. But in elementary and middle school, that's all occurring in the spring.
Okay. Now, on these, and you mentioned diagnostic tests, or maybe somebody at the board, and then you went on and had an explanation. Is that, are those given at the beginning of the year?
So diagnostics are given incrementally throughout the year, starting with an August or September administration, where every teacher gets an indicator of where the child is starting that particular school year, and then can plan their instruction to be very specific based on exactly where every child is beginning.
The, isn't that what formative does? It gives you a spot where am I? And where do I need to go? And then summative test where I went.
So formative is specifically linked to learning the standards. Diagnostic is more closely linked to your skills and your proficiency. That's why we do that in reading, for example. We determine your Lexile in August, and then we know how far you have to grow by the end of the school year to be on grade level. And we put together a plan for you so that we are accelerating your growth in your proficiency in reading. That's not specifically linked to the standards. That's more a skill development. And a perfect example of that is our CCRPI calculation does include student performance by Lexile. And you can actually earn points based on the number of kids that are reading within the grade level Lexile band. Well, until this year, we never measured that until we got to the very end of the year. But now that we have a reading diagnostic that we're giving at least three times throughout the year, we know a child's Lexile in August, in November, and then again in February, and we have a specific instructional plan for that child in order to ensure that whether you start on grade level or you start behind grade level, you are growing, and if you start above grade level, you are also growing. And therefore, you don't wait until that summative moment that the state tells you you are on or below grade level.
Just a couple more quick questions on testing, and thank you. Are these tests, whether summative, diagnostics, or formative, are any of those driven by us at the county level, or are all of them driven by the state requirements?
The summative are driven by the state requirements. Diagnostic and formative is what we all experienced when we went to school and our teacher gave us a quiz at the end of the day or a test at the end of the week. It's a part of the teaching and learning cycle. It's how teachers know that you have learned what has been taught and we're ready to move on. So those are locally developed, often classroom developed approaches to monitoring student learning. And I think it's important to also separate out that we've been talking about the milestone assessments that the state has required, but the real burden of testing came with the addition of SLOs into our system, and that is also a summative version of an assessment, and that's what caused there to be a very heavy burden of assessment in December and in April, May. That is a little further removed from what teachers need every day to make decisions about how they're going to teach the next day.
Well, and I guess my final comment, which you may want to respond to, my questions are driven by, we, at the state level and teachers, there are too many tests, we're driven by tests. And that's what I guess I'm trying to get a handle on is, or even though the state has passed, the laws saying, I think it was part of 364, but I'm not sure, reducing the amount of tests? Are we just piling on more tests, we being at whatever level? So,
I think
Let me jump in on this, because I think what you've just identified is kind of a misnomer at some degree. Because while we definitely agree that there's too much testing being pushed down to us, let's not miss the target of testing is absolutely required and necessary in order to measure growth. But I think you identified 364, and that's a good point to identify. For example, one of the biggest benefits that we receive from 364 is being able to say, if the district is already administering an assessment that measures X, then you can use that instead of having to duplicate that same testing measurement by something that the state is requiring. So for example, our SRI and SMI, the reading and math diagnostic, we'll be able to use that conceptually for some of the testing requirements from the state. So, and I don't want us to get too far down in the weeds that we miss the forest for the trees. The key component of the SRI, SMI is that, like Mary Elizabeth said, we've never measured this before. We always talk about, you know, having a certain goal, like for example, of everybody reading on grade level by third grade. Well, we've never measured our students where their performance is, whether it's above, on, or below grade level. So that's kind of, you know, the district priorities that we have up there, the last bullet, use data to make decisions. That's been our big focus about this is the SRI, SMI, we funded and budgeted from the district level. That's never been done before as well. But our intent is to be able to provide the teachers and the principals with the data that they need to individualize instruction such that they can move that student, that class, and that school forward. And I want to finally say and just remind everyone that with our IE squared contract, we don't have an option. Every single school has to make 3 years of growth within a 6-year time period. And that measurement is a derivative or directly tied to CCRPI. So when a school score is 50, then the gap between 50 and 100, and remember challenge points can't be applied to this measurement, that's the growth measurement divided by, you know, the yearly progress that each school has to make. Now, the high-performing schools, remember, if they're in the top quartile of the state, then for 3 years they have to remain in the top quartile. So this last year was our baseline benchmarking year, so that everybody's starting to move forward next year. And the importance that I want to stress again is that our schools don't have a choice. They have to grow. So being able to provide them data, especially from things like the SRI, SMI, but the huge benefit of Senator Tippin's legislation is being able to not make districts and teachers and schools duplicate efforts, because that is just, that's ridiculous. That we're, you know, as a district, we see the importance of measuring the students' progress so that we can improve the academic performance, but yet then you have to take away from instructional time to duplicate that same assessment because the state says you got to administer this. So that's the huge benefit of 364. And really, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, but I appreciate bringing up that point because it is something that we can't lose track of in the argument of, yes, we want to reduce testing. We can't cut our nose off to spite our face, you know, because testing is absolutely required for us to be able to measure where students are. And thus where teachers need to teach and focus their efforts to move those students academically.
So I'm just going to add that I think that distinction is so important. Our community wants our teachers to be well informed about where their child is every day of the school year. And our parents want to be able to know what needs to happen every day of the school year to improve that. I think However, a classroom teacher-controlled approach to diagnosing and assessing a student's performance is the right place to keep it. The larger scale, big statewide administrations of large looming assessments that contribute to large accountability measures, that gets further removed from the teacher's information needed to actually ensure children are advancing.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale, and I agree with you. My questions are not to try to reduce necessarily the classroom testing or quizzes and things like that, but we all know that's a big thing about excess testing, and one of the things that you pointed out that I think is a good point is that we don't have to duplicate a lot of things, and so I don't want to get in the weeds. I'll let you all do that, but I want to make sure our public understands where we are and what we're trying to do. And then I almost forgot one last quick question, Dr. Davis and Dr. Ewing. You mentioned a student finishing up third grade, then they have some summer requirements posted on the internet. What if parents don't access that? What happens to the student when they go into the fourth grade?
I didn't mean to suggest it be a requirement. It just really actually is just summer opportunities and summer materials for parents who are looking for that. And we've actually had quite a few parents in even the recent months calling, asking, what can I actually do this summer with my child? Any recommendations? That's for the parents that are looking for that.
Is this information more remedial or to accelerate their learning during the summer?
It can be used a variety of ways, quite honestly. If you needed to do some shoring up of your previous year coursework, then you could access the previous year's coursework. And if you're already prepared to advance, you could access a subsequent year's.
Okay.
It would be completely open.
Okay. And I'd like to thank both of you. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Superintendent, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Dr. Davis and Dr. Ewing, excellent presentation as usual. Thank you very much. I have just a couple of quick questions and comments. Number one, I had a principal share with me at one time that there was a student that had scored a perfect score on an SAT test, and yet their parting gift from the state of Georgia was that the student needed improvement because they didn't have some progress. So the concerning thing that I have relative, and a very, very high-performing student, obviously, the concern that I have is that we're shifting from a 25-point measure to a 40-point measure on progress. And we have some extraordinarily high-performing schools in Cobb County. Are they going to be penalized for that lack of progress, yet still being very high-achieving schools?
Sure. So to talk to your example, I think we've spoken to the same principal, so I can give you a little bit of a background here. Let's say that I'm in the 9th grade and I take 9th grade literature, and at the end of that course, I take the end of course test and I score a 94. Then the next year in the 10th grade, I take 10th grade lit, I take that test and I score a 93. When you look at those two scores independently, they're not showing growth or progress. And that was the principal's complaint. So we've addressed that with the state, we've addressed that with the state board, we've addressed that with the state superintendent, and we've made that fact known to the testing people at the State Department. So everyone's heard us on that, and I don't think that was the intention when they originally came up with those tests, that you would penalize students from one grade to the next when you're at the 93rd or 94th percentile on a test. So we've made those concerns known, and we will continue to do that.
All right, thank you very much. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and Dr. Davis brought this forward in her presentation and talked about the number of schools in where Cobb County, and I'm just going to use high schools here, that absent the magnet programs, for example, across the state and how our performance is. Excuse me. I'm going to throw out a couple of numbers here. There are, in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution recently cited the 10 best high schools in the state. And those were the Gwinnett School of Math and Sciences and Technology, and their enrollment is only 879 students. Second was DeKalb Early College Academy with 309 students. These are selective academic achievement enrollment schools. There are criteria for these students to get into, and essentially they're picking the best of the best. The average enrollment for some of these schools outside of Cobb County in the top 10 is 623 students. We have 4 schools in the top 10. The average enrollment of those is 2,288 students. And as Ms. Davis or Dr. Davis alluded to, is that absent those, you have Lassiter, Walton, Hillgrove, and Pope collectively that really would be the top 4 schools with larger student populations. And it's really a testament to the quality of the education that's being provided within Cobb County. And I just want to thank the administration, the teachers, and also big kudos to the students for that level of achievement at those schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Wheeler? Oh, Mr. Wheeler's been answered. Okay. Are there any other questions right now for either one of our doctors here in front of us? Okay. All right, thank you both. Excellent presentation. We appreciate you keeping us informed and giving us information that we can kind of feel the pulse of everything. I did have one quick question. As far as looking at some of our lower performing schools, particularly at the elementary level, are we differentiating resources to those schools other than Title I to address some of these issues? Dr. Davis?
Well, I actually think Title I is a very key contributor to the way we differentiate our resources, because that is a substantial sum of additional funds for our schools who are serving communities that are in poverty. In particular, the ability to lower class size in those particular schools, in addition to providing resources beyond what the district is delivering, is an opportunity. And we are starting to focus very closely on successful instructional models for similar schools across the state and nation, and really trying to hone in on what is working in a like school with like demographics and with like conditions, and then actually trying to grow from there.
Looking at okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you both. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And at Mr. Morgan's request, we will take a 10-minute break. So we will be back at, what is that? I'm sorry. Okay, 10:10. Okay. Thank you. We're on agenda item number 5, the superintendent's report, and this brings us to the second part of that item, quarterly financial report. Mr. Ragsdale.
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask Chief Financial Officer Brad Johnson to come forward and bring the report.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, and Mr. Superintendent. I'm presenting to you today the quarterly financial report for the third quarter of fiscal year 2016. This report reflects financial data for the 9-month period ended March 31st, 2016. I will briefly cover some highlights from the first 4 sections of the report, which are finance, cash management, school food services, and capital projects. The remaining data at the end of the report is presented for informational purposes only and identifies payments and budget adjustments greater than $100,000. As always, this report will be posted to our website to enable the public to review it. For today, I have placed a copy of the presentation at your desk, along with the detailed notebook, and you can also follow along with us on the screen, on the video screen in the boardroom. The first section of the report and the first tab entitled Financial Report contains a summary of financial information for each of the district's individual funds. As always, we focus on the general fund, which is the district's primary and largest fund. Please look at the pie chart behind the Financial Report tab or on the screen. You'll notice that as of March 31st, 75% of the fiscal year has elapsed, and we have collected 84% of our revenue, our budgeted revenues, and we have expended or encumbered 75% of the expense budget. A broad review of general fund financial performance indicates that our revenue collections are similar to previous years, but expenditures for the current year are tighter than previous years, and that has been the case for the first 2 quarters this year. A review of the expenditures shows that we spent 75% of the budget through the end of the third quarter compared to 73% last year. These figures indicate that the district is managing its current year budget, but you will remember that the board approved the use of additional laps to balance the budget last year, as well as give a 4% salary increase. So as I have previously stated in the budget, this year's budget continues to be tight. One further note on this, this report, I think, justifies my high confidence level in the budget department with their estimates and the accounting department with their recording of revenues and expenditures, with the fact that we spent exactly 75% of the budget 75% of the way through the year in a $1 billion budget. That's pretty good estimating. So I appreciate their work. The next slide is a summary of revenues and expenditures as of March 31st, 2016. The format of this report are there are 2 sections down the left side entitled Revenue and Expenditures. And across the top, there are multiple columns for original budget, revised budget, year-to-date actual expenditures, encumbrances, and then several metrics on the right side for over and under budget and percent differences. In the first column, we begin showing that the original budget in the current year, we had $924 million in revenue compared to $944 million in expenditure appropriations, resulting in a budgeted use of $20 million in total fund balance, and that was approved by the board in the budget last year. Next, please look at the first category entitled Revenue. We begin with the original and revised budget of $924.9 million. Actual revenue collected through the third quarter was $776 million, which results in 84% of our revenue collected 3/4 of the way through the year. I think that's compared to 85% last year, so we're right on target. Next, please look at the second category entitled Expenditures. For expenditures, we begin with an original budget of $944.9 million. In the second column, we show revisions to the expenditure budget, which the board approved. The board approved a change to the expenditure budget of $3 million for additional teachers and support personnel in July. $199,000 in capital projects planning, and $1.8 million for land purchases. These changes, along with encumbrances from the previous year, revised the expenditure budget to a total of $957.9 million. Actual expenditures of $715 million and $4.1 million in encumbrances results in the district having spent 75% of the budget 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year. Next slide, please. The next slide in the presentation is cash management. Cash management is our second section of the report. The first schedule in this section shows that we have earned $561,503 this year in interest in all funds for the 9 months ended March 31st, 2016. This is compared to earnings of interest of $552,000 last year at the same time. So we're kind of equal to last year. The weighted average rate of return as of March 31st was 0.36%. And although that rate is not as beefy as I would like, it is 7 points higher than the 0.29% rate of a 3-month Treasury bill. Unfortunately, interest rates have been extremely low for quite some time now, and it appears they will continue to be low for the foreseeable future. It is truly amazing how low interest rates have been. I think I did mention to the board in the last quarterly report that the Federal Reserve raised their key interest rate from 0 to 0.25%. So on the positive side, hopefully banks will begin to raise their interest rates on investments. On the negative side, it appears that banks are starting to count on fees to make money, so there might be some wash there. So it's going to be hard to continue to earn additional interest. Just for a point of comparison, if you look back 8 years ago, we were earning as much as $9 or $10 million in interest income. So we have a long way to go to get back. Despite the low rates, we do regularly consult with our financial advisor, Diane McNabb of the PFM Group, in order to obtain the best possible market rate of return, while at the same time ensuring that the investments are safe. Our priority is safety of the principal on this money. Next slide, please. The next section of this presentation is the school food service report. This report shows meal-related activity at each school for both the current month and the fiscal year to date. And of course, what you're seeing on the slide here is a summary of that. For FY 2016 overall in the third quarter, elementary schools show a year-to-date loss of $843,000. Middle schools have a profit of $384,000. High schools have a profit of $644,000. And finally, the other section, which is things like USDA commodities and cafeteria equipment, a profit of $93,000, for a total net profit of $278,000. You will remember that we reported a loss last year, and we talked about the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010. So the department in food service has done a great job of trying to have strategies to continue to make this a profitable or at least a break-even operation. They've done a lot of things like one more meal per labor hour, reduce food costs by serving smaller containers, fewer large equipment purchases, those types of things. But the financial management of this fund will continue to be a challenge because we see increasing costs in food. They have the increasing cost of health insurance. They have the increasing cost of salaries. So that will continue to be an issue. Next slide, please. This next section of the quarterly report presentation is a report of SPLOST and capital projects financial condition. These sections reflect revenue and expenditures in the capital project funds. This section includes SPLOST 3, SPLOST 4, and the countywide building fund. One thing that I always want to point out is the current SPLOST fund that we are in, and that is SPLOST 4. And that's in the SPLOST 4 tab in the notebook or on the screen or your handout. And here you can see that this schedule shows that the collections for the SPLOST 4 program inception to date are $272 million, and but they are coming in below forecast projections, or 6.8% below projections. Some comments regarding these revenue collections. The district is continuing to monitor SPLOST revenues to identify trends in sales tax collections. We're also hopeful in the state of Georgia economy as it continues to improve, which might assist in bringing in additional revenue for the current SPLOST program. We are also monitoring major projects such as the new Braves Stadium, which could provide additional sales tax revenue during the out years of the current SPLOST 4 program. And it is anticipated that the district could collect approximately $20 to $30 million in state construction reimbursement funding. Madam Chair, this concludes the presentation of the quarterly financial report, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
If I can too, let me just tack on, because I mean, I know we all understand the importance of Brad's division, but let me just point out again that 75% of the way through the fiscal year, we have expended 75% of our budget, or the expenditures rather. That is better than just good forecasting. And what Brad and his team of financial services allows us to do by being that precise is creating a budget that includes things like teacher raises. If we didn't have the confidence in knowing that the numbers coming from Brad and his team are going to be what they are, and granted, we don't expect them to be perfect, just 99.9% perfect, but we couldn't create things like the teacher raises and have confidence that we can fund those moving forward. Because let's not forget, everything that we put in the budget, as we will discuss later, is recurring and increases exponentially. So it's through his division's preciseness that we're able to do that. So I just want to say thanks again for, and a lot of his team is here today, so thanks to you guys for what you do.
Thanks for the comments. And our directors of budget, Mandy Wissing, and Director of Accounting, Jan Hendricks, they were fantastic.
Thank you to all of you. We appreciate the fact that you represent our school system so well, and that the reliability of that department does make us more effective in our procedures and everything that we do. So we do sincerely appreciate that. Are there any questions, comments? Mr. Scammahorn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as usual, Mr. Johnson, excellent job. On the food service area, are they paid separate from other employees, whether it's, are they paid out of this money, the food service people?
The food service program is a self-supporting program.
Okay.
And the money comes from meal prices and also assistance from the federal government.
Okay.
The budget's approximately $50 to $55 million.
So when we award, a 2.5% pay raise, that does not affect them?
They get it as well.
Okay.
And so they have to work their budget to include that raise in their budget, and they also have to generate enough revenue to cover it. And we're closely work with them and monitoring them. They have done a great job over the past years of maintaining a fund balance, and that gives us some flexibility because this is a difficult fund to operate now with the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act.
Do they have the latitude to give a higher raise or lower raise depending on their budget then?
I think I might defer to the superintendent
Yeah, it's certainly up to them, but again, and John can speak to this since food service falls up under his leadership, but it is certainly up to them to do, above and beyond or less if it called for that. Fortunately, we've not been put in that situation. But they do want to do the same thing that we do for all employees. John, you want to speak to that additionally?
Yes, sir. And the department is incredibly well managed by Cynthia Downs and her staff. When you think about running 112 different Piccadillys and having to at least break even in a given year, she's done a terrific job just to be able to match the employee raise for all other employees in a given year. And she's going to struggle in the future having to come up with the additional $100 a month that it's going to cost to insure classified employees. A lot of our hardworking food service folks are there primarily for the benefits, but we've got confidence in her, and at least as you can see from Brad's presentation, they've leveled out and are now at least got their head barely above water.
Okay. And final question, do they have the option to provide management or executive management end-of-year bonuses, if so desired?
I think that's a compensation question that we would have to address in the budget this year or next year.
Theoretically, go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, conceptually, yes, but food service employees are employees of the Cobb County School District. And so could they? Yes. Should they? Well, not unless we do it across the budget for all the other employees, because even though they're paid out of a different fund, we still maintain equity and, like, for example, the 2.5% raise. They are going to have to, they being Cynthia, is going to have to manage the budget in such a way that they can provide that 2.5% raise, because, again, it's recurring, so it will increase again as next year goes as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Superintendent, when the board approved a 2.5% raise across the board, and your recommendation, we approved it. So I assume before we did that, you had discussions with food service to make sure that they could handle their portion of it, because once we approved it across the board, it does require them to do that. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thanks. Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to focus on the splash revenues and expenditures. Mr. Adams, could you give us an analysis of where we are right now as far as revenue and what your projections are, and how will the reimbursements affect is it included in the revenue stream?
Sure. And for once, I actually have some data that's even a little more recent than my friend and colleague to my right. I have fresh off the presses SPLOS revenue data that includes April as well. There's bad news and there's good news. The bad news is that we are still, and this will come as no surprise to anyone who follows us closely, that actual SPLOS revenues are still significantly below the projected revenues. So far through 2016, we're about 9% below the projected revenues. I can't tell you how the projections were derived in a great amount of detail, but they've consistently been off. So we've just had to factor that into our decisions and monitor our cash flow accordingly. That's the bad news. The good news, though, is we've started beginning in this January comparing month-to-month actual collections to the prior month the year before. So when you look at actuals year to year, so far in the first 4 months of this year, SPLOS collections are actually up about 2% compared to the same period last year. So we're trending in a good direction. We're just below projections. We're going to have to continue to monitor our cash flow closely. I would caution anyone, though, to make a linear or static analysis about where we're going to go from here, because we are cautiously optimistic, once again, that the economic activity generated by the Braves Stadium will give us more of an uptick as that kicks in.
Also, I'd like to point out that the deficit that we're incurring is really not the true picture, because the car fee of $12 million was taken out of the revenue stream, which if it was back in, we would actually be over our estimates and our projections. So the car fee change, I think that was in 2014. Is that about right? So since the beginning of SPLOST 4, we've had to incur that loss of revenue of $12 million each year from the car fee. And so if you take that into consideration, we're really not under budget as far as expected or projected revenue. So it's, for the public consumption out there, we're not really, our projections are probably a little bit low, and I've expressed that before, but due to that $12 million that actually goes into the general budget now, we're short a deficit, but actuality, the real picture is we're not really, as far as SPLOST is concerned, we're really pretty much right on target. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brad, going back to the cafeteria workers, I've got a question with the managers and the employees, and I would carry this on with custodians and bus drivers. Are all those, do they have step raises in there, or are they just given a flat rate for their jobs?
I think most of the positions are on a salary scale, and so the 2.5% raise and the step increases are applied to that.
So let's say a 10-year lunchroom manager doesn't make more than a third-year one?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. John, do you?
Brad, I think your understanding is correct, but I'll check that and verify.
Yeah.
Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnson, excellent presentation as usual. I have just a quick question and maybe an observation here as well. With the SPLOST revenues, there's a much higher percentage of people that are doing online shopping today. And I'm curious to find out, and I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but the sales tax for those brick and mortar stores are located and we're doing online shopping. Are we recognizing the full 1% from those online purchases? Or, for example, are they just charged at the state rate, and then are we getting any remittance from the state? I'm wondering if there's a delta there, because I know more and more people are making online purchases today.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that would be something I'd have to call the Georgia Department of Revenue to see how that does work.
Yeah, and I think you understand my point, is that if, we're at 6%, 4% on the state, 1% on county, 1% on EdSPLOST, is the online retailers, are they taxing at a 4% rate? Because I don't think they reduce it to the county, for example, on where the purchase may occur. And then I'm just like, it's perhaps another hole as far as what the revenue, shortage may be.
That's a good question, and I need to research that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? Okay, all right. Thank you again, Mr. Johnson, and your staff. Great job. Thank you. All right, that brings us to our board agenda items. Item number 1.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, members of the board, as our current practice is, you've received an electronic copy of the school properties that are up for disposal, and this is a recommendation for authorization of school properties disposable per District Administrative Rule DO-R.
Recommend for consent? No opposition? Okay, that one will go on consent. Thanks. Number 2.
Ask Mr. John Adams to come and bring items number 2 and 3.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, Madam Chair, members of the board. Brief follow-up, Mr. Wheeler, through the magic of the worldwide interwebs, I was able to check, and we do have steps for those employees, the food service employees. They have steps just like a other classified employee will.
Mr. Adams?
Yes, sir.
Can you check on that for bus drivers and custodians, too?
Custodians, definitely. I'll check on bus drivers.
Okay.
Agenda item number 2, recommendation for approval to award a contract for painting at Burney Elementary School, Baker Elementary School, and Dowell Elementary School. As is usually the case, once again bringing a SPLOST 4 item. Those elementary schools are scheduled to receive painting. These would be interior painting items, interior halls, classrooms, and offices for those schools in accordance with SPLOST 4 and as budgeted in SPLOST 4. We did receive 3 proposals. we're recommending that you award the contract to A&D Painting out of Tucker, Georgia for $284,000. Some good news that the SPLOST 4 planning estimate for this was $685,000, so we're coming in significantly below that estimate. And we estimate that substantial completion date will be July 22nd, 2016. I'm available for any questions.
Mr. Wheeler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's quite a sizable difference. Is there any reasons for that? Or, I mean, that's almost $500,000.
Yeah, we'll take it.
I mean-
The three bids came back ranging from 284 to 466. And we're recommending you go with the 284. We're also very familiar with this firm as well. They do a significant amount of work for us on other projects, so they do excellent quality. So we're gonna not look to give horse in the mouth and try to maximize our taxpayer resources.
Is there a recommendation? Discussion agenda? Okay. It moves to discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3, recommendation to approve sewer and temporary construction easements at Teasley Elementary School. Brooks Chadwick, a residential development firm, has requested a temporary construction easement and a sewer easement at Teasley Elementary School, right along the property line. They're have purchased the property next door for a mixed-use development, residential and shops, and they require the easement to tie in to the existing sewer line. They're both relatively small. The temporary easement, you see, only 556 square feet, and the sewer easement, 276. No cost to the district, obviously. We're recommending that you approve both those easements next to Teasley so that the folks next door who've purchased the property can tie into the existing sewer for their development. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sweeney?
Madam Chair, I recommend that we move this to consent.
All those approved? Okay, consent. Thank you.
All right, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask Dr. Mary Elizabeth Davis to come forward and bring a brief presentation. Again, just a reminder that these next 2 items are going under the new and improved process for acquiring learning resources. As you remember, back in the day, we would bring you a textbook adoption, and basically we would adopt the textbook and whatever peripherals went with that. And now the new process has been presented numerous times and discussed at length. So this will be the new process, and she's going to update us on that and bring the items.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent, and today I am here to make a recommendation regarding the acquisition of K-2 ELA resources along with K-12 World Language resources. But before we proceed to the recommendation, I do believe context is appropriate as we have embarked on our very inaugural process of our new resource acquisition strategy. So our district priorities have been focused specifically on using data to make decisions. I hope you see significant representation of how data has been used to come to this particular recommendation. And as I begin, while we'll be looking at 2 specific adoptions today, I'll talk specifically at the conclusion about our K-2 ELA, and then I'll ask Dr. Ewing to join me to talk about the world languages and dual language immersion. Okay, so let's just take a little bit of a backtrack and recall that we are governed in this process by IFAA-R, which is our Instructional Resources Selection and Acquisition Board rule. And this did originate in 1979, and you know, except for a few minor modifications over the course of that time, it had not been updated until this past January, February, when you all as a board voted to completely transform our approach to acquiring resources for teaching and learning in 2016. So let's just put a side-by-side comparison.
I want to make sure everybody paid attention to that. That was not a typo. 1979.
What happened? I wasn't.
Well, you got to get here on time, man. Come on. Pay attention.
And because Mr. Rangstyle likes this emphasis, that was 37 years ago, and that was before there were computers in our classrooms, before there was access to the internet, and information was very limited to a hardbound resource. That is no longer the case today. So while we had a historical process that was developed in 1979, it was exclusively focused on single publisher providers. Our new process, our industry-leading process, actually attracts a variety of providers to build a portfolio of resources directly aligned with our standards. Our historical process engaged a limited amount of stakeholders and a very small representation of our teaching force in order to make some recommendations to our board. But our current process, under your leadership now developed in 2016, engages every school, as many parents who are interested in participating, many school leaders, and the community in multiple ways and in multiple times, which I will give you the specifics of those outcomes in a moment. And we were limited to the purchased, publisher-determined, one-size-fits-all solution in our historical process. Essentially, if it said Georgia on the cover, we kind of thought that was going to be how we teach that particular content area. Well, we know that that is an outdated approach to teaching and learning, and so we are now purchasing a customized and tailored collection of resources aligned specifically to our teaching and learning needs. So we have really been on this journey for about 2 years now. Let's just take a walk back 2 years ago. It was in June of 2014 that we pursued a long and laborious process of a K-12 mathematics adoption. During that time, our board and community revealed several priorities as we move forward as an organization in how we acquire resources for the future. Those priorities were to abolish the concept of a single publisher-provided solution. It was to engage more substantial representation of our stakeholder involvement, and third, to aggressively negotiate cost. Information shouldn't be as expensive as it always has been. So it took us a year to do our research and to really find out how the industry could be impacted and how our process could be transformed. So 1 year ago, almost today, in June of 2015, we presented a superintendent's report titled Instructional Materials, a Comprehensive Content and Resource Acquisition Strategy, in which we laid out our vision and concept for redesigning the acquisition process. And then in February of 2016, this board voted on revisions to the board rule that governs our approach. Since then, we have been out making your vision and your board rule happen. And today I come to you and I present to you the recommendation of our community and of our teachers and our school leaders and our content experts in order for you to now process, review, and make a decision at our May evening meeting. Okay, so here's that acquisition process. I know you all have familiarity with the board rule, but I've summarized it into how we actually made it happen. First of all, we started by identifying 3 major sources of content or resources. That's your locally developed resources, what we do in-house with our teacher experts and our content experts, open educational resources, which are typically free resources available in a variety of ways that we can actually curate and pull into our environment for instruction, and then the typical publisher-produced content. However, we now focus on a boutique approach in which we customize and tailor their packages as opposed to taking every little last leaflet that goes along with an old-fashioned box of resources. Second is we actually began, before even advertising our process, with a needs assessment. But this needs assessment wasn't just for our teachers. Administrators and parents also participated. And what you can see is that we had a significant contribution to get us started. 478 teachers, 44 administrators, and 321 parents participated in the needs assessment. What do we need as a district in order to teach at high levels and for students to learn at high levels? And I'd love to compare this to previous processes, but we actually had not done this approach to a needs assessment in a previous version of our process. All right, third step was we developed our request for information, which is what gets provided to all of the people in the industry who provide resources to school systems, and it was based exclusively on our needs assessment. And finally, we convened a review committee. I'm so proud to say, and I want you to start focusing on the increased and engaged stakeholders as I begin this part of the presentation, because in 2013-14, the last time we looked at instructional resources, we had 16 schools and 19 teachers participate in the K-2 recommendation that came before the board. But today I stand before you with a recommendation that comes from 31 schools and 81 teachers who are part of that specific review committee. We then actually use that review committee to facilitate a full process of evaluation. And in phase 1 of that process, it was an obvious standards alignment. Anything that didn't align to the standards, out it went, not part for consideration. Phase 2 was identifying critical features. What do we actually believe we need to teach very successful English language arts in our organization? Of course, phonics was over and over again something that revealed itself as a huge priority. That's an example of a critical feature. And then our review committee created lesson plans with these materials that are under consideration, so that in phase 3, they went into classrooms and actually used a variety of the different sampled resources to see how students respond and sort of how the instructional feel of using that resource might actually be able to be captured. That is a very important component of this process that we had never done before. We actually took the resources and put them in the hands of students and put them in the hands of teachers in classrooms, and we evaluated whether it made an instructional impact. That is really incredible. Okay, so in phase 4 of our evaluation, we then took a look at these specific areas, and we made an evaluation tool available to every single teacher who teaches K2 English Language Arts. And there were packages of the materials at every single one of our schools. So there was not a need to even leave your school building to get your hands on the materials and get experience in the classroom if you wanted to. We had 768 teachers participate and provide feedback on their experience with those resources. Then we go to the public review. This is when the community and parents have the opportunity to participate, and all of the materials that were out and for consideration, aligned to our standards, were available for 3 weeks. That's the longest we've ever done anything of that nature. And that was from March 7th through the 25th. They were actually right here in our boardroom, you might remember, and our board meeting days of March 9th and March 24th, we had resources all along these walls. We also had anything that was digital available on our district website. So you didn't even have to come to the boardroom to get a glimpse of everything that was going to be made available for decision making. And then we had a month in which all of the results that came from that public review were put in the hands of our review committee, and they ended up with recommended materials. We're going to talk about those recommended materials today. Those recommended materials have been on public review since April 27th, and we had 82 community members participate in the public review during that time period, and you can see that's compared to the 6 that participated in the 2013-14 math adoption. So as I come to the conclusion of articulating what I would identify as an industry-leading process that has transformed the way we acquire instructional and learning materials for our children, I have got to applaud the leadership of Jennifer Lawson, the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, Janelle McClure, the Director of Digital and Multimedia Learning, and Brian Smith, our Supervisor of Learning Resources. This is a process that districts around the country are now calling our team to find out, how did you do it? How did you move away from relying only on publishers? And how are you actually compiling a portfolio approach to meeting the students' learning needs in your district? It has been very incredible work, and I thank the leadership of our board for embarking on this with us. So that does bring me to actually talking about the ELA resources that are being recommended today. And so I'm going to start back with something very important. As a community, we have aimed to distance ourselves from the Common Core and from the fluctuation in state decisions about what teaching and learning should look like. This is a slide you have seen every month for about a year now, and as we distance ourselves from other decision makers and take ownership of what teaching and learning looks like in our district, how we choose resources falls right in line with that. We launched the Cobb commitment, which included standards that are Cobb specific, aligned to the state, and a balanced approach to literacy. So when I present to you the K2 ELA recommendation, this is our commitment to every parent and every child continuing to unfold. that our resources will now reflect Cobb teaching and learning standards, and our resources will reflect our commitment to a balanced approach to literacy instruction. And finally, you've seen this on our screen and in superintendent reports previously, but our balanced approach to literacy is at the foundation of our recommendation today, and that begins with foundational skills. Phonics, phonemic awareness, letter recognition, that has been very important to our community, and you'll see heavy emphasis of ensuring our resources are aligned to that today. We also have a priority of reading, speaking and listening, and writing, all of which our resources are combined to represent. This foundation in Cobb is essential. We have to start here when we talk about what we're going to acquire and spend our resources on for teaching and learning, and this would not be possible without the leadership of Melissa Morse, our Director of Instruction and Innovative Practice, and Liz Cobia and her team, the Supervisor of English Language Arts. This has been very heavy lifting to now build all of the supplemental resources that go with this particular philosophy of instruction for our teachers. So today's recommendation for English Language Arts K-2 is focused on three categories, reading and phonics in particular. I actually have a few samples I want to show you because I think our community really wants to see a heavy emphasis on our phonics. This particular resource is the benchmark resource. As you can see, phonological awareness and letter awareness. This is for our kindergarten year, early years. And we continue to advance as we talk about very important phonics concepts, as you can see in this particular example, is short vowels and consonants. And that is our benchmark education provider. A reading level library for our schools and to the degree possible for our local classrooms so that there can be student choice in the literature. And then finally, writing, which a focus on improving our writing starting in our kindergarten years through a product called Units of Study. So Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent, this brings me to agenda item number 4 and a recommendation for approval of the Learning Resources Acquisition for K-2 English Language Arts. The quote has come in at $5,185,288. And before I turn it over to you for discussion and make myself available for questions, I want to mention that the original quote came in at $20 million. But because of our commitment to a boutique approach in which we parse out what is unnecessary for teaching and learning and prioritize only what aligns with that needs assessment, only what aligns with the Cobb commitment, and only aligns with what our teachers and parents see as essential for classroom instruction, we were able to negotiate that to that value. I turn it over to you, Madam Chair.
Let me just add one more thing, because I saw everybody perk up when she said 20 million to 5 million. So that's a negotiation of $15 million. But I want to go back to your slide about Phase 4 evaluation, where this year we had 768 teacher evaluations, and in 2013 it says NA. Why is that?
In this particular aspect of the process, we did not have a full open teacher evaluation process where anybody who teaches K-2 had the opportunity to contribute.
So we've gone from 0 to 768 teachers being able to provide input and feedback on the resource acquisition.
All right, thank you, Dr. Davis and Mr. Ragsdale. Thank you particularly, Dr. Davis, for a point-on presentation reminding us of our rules and procedures and explaining to us this much more user-friendly approach to adopting materials. Regardless of savings, it sounds like anytime you involve all the elements that you involved in giving the length of time and particularly the use of materials in the classroom and having teachers evaluate those, outstanding approach, and we appreciate your outlining that process for us. So, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Superintendent, the 768 teachers, were that just for that category of the item that we're discussing now? That's not the whole scope of all the classes that we teach. This is just a limited
Just K-2
focus.
English Language Arts. Dr. Ewing will present the world language participation. That was a K-2 English Language Arts.
Okay.
So K-2 teachers.
So it's a large percentage of the teachers
Yes.
that are involved in this evaluation that on this focus that we're talking about. So it's not like the 4,000 or 5,000 teachers involved. It's not that percentage. It's almost I would say close to 100% of the teachers involved in that particular discipline doing the evaluation. So it's a good measure.
That is a very good point, Mr. Banks, yes. And I'm glad you brought up that point because the 768 is just related to K2. So when we expand that and we have a larger resource adoption, then obviously we'll have many more teachers involved in that process.
Mr. Scammahorn, you had a question?
More of a comment. Thank
Okay.
you. Dr. Davis and Mr. Ragsdale, to your staff, I just want to start out with wow. You know, we remember the many discussions in early 2013 when we were all saying this is no way to run a railroad. This is no way to be imprisoned by 5 publishers giving us stuff that we didn't want to buy, but we had to buy. So this will not go down in the history books as a paradigm shift, but it really is. It really is. It is just fantastic and just a prime example of many of the other unrelated examples where this staff does not give lip service to moving forward and finding new ways, regardless of the economics of it. The $15 million savings is fantastic in itself. But more importantly, we're moving forward, you're moving forward to help our customers, our parents, our students. And I'm just amazed. And this is not the ending point, I'm sure. But, and you didn't, I don't think you said textbooks more than once. And that's great. Anyway, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to let folks know this, it takes time on some of these things, but just outstanding job. Thank you.
Mr. Morgan?
Yes, thank you for the presentation, Dr. Davis. Piggyback off what you said, Randy, which I think is always important, internally and externally. We have an improved process because of checks and balances, because of a process that when we started this process in terms of how we adopted resources and materials, there was a fervent split on the board. But now, if you look at what we have now, the processes, the involvement, and the input that we have, I think a person will be hard pressed to say that this is a process that is manufactured in hollow rhetoric, so to speak. So I think kudos, especially to you, Randy, to be perfectly honest, because I know that there were a lot of concerns that you had, and justifiably so. Secondly, to the administration, because it is real easy sometimes just to push back and say we're going to stay how we are, and we're going to ram something down your throat. But we have an improved process, and I think that comes again from having a healthy superintendent board work structure where you can disagree and people know that it's based upon transparency and only wanting the best. So I would be remiss if I did not say that. And again, thank both parties for where we are now when it comes to the adoption of resources for learning for our children.
Do we have a motion? Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. More of a technical thing on the agenda item. I know there's a text in here in the background that represents this is coming out of SPLOST, but in the cost section, it doesn't include any SPLOST reference. Just so a lot of times we include that as a line item in there, so you might want to just.
Mr. Scammahorn?
And that would apply to our next agenda item as well. So.
Right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to, it was unexpected. I wanted to thank Mr. Morgan for his comments, but also, again, back to it's extremely important to have the right staff at the right place to get things done where things are moving. And it's just a tribute to Dr. Davis and the others that you mentioned. I can't remember. You're welcome to repeat them. And to the superintendent. And if you're looking for a recommendation, discussion, please.
Okay, we'll move that one to a discussion. Let's see, thank you. Yeah, let's go ahead and do number 5.
Good morning again, Madam Chair, members of the board. The superintendent is pleased to bring to you the recommendation for world language instructional resources for the district. It is important to note that the district offers language instruction to all students in high school, our 8th grade students in middle school, and beginning this year, a dual language elementary language program in 2 elementary schools, Smyrna Elementary and Riverside Primary. The materials and resources presented for board approval represent a compilation of materials selected by content area foreign language teachers, as well as school and community review by faculty, staff, students, parents, and community members. Madam Chair, I would like to point out that enrollment in foreign language programs has increased from the last adoption, and we're proud to announce today that 22,926 students are studying foreign language in our respective schools. I would be remiss if I did not thank Mr. Herman Suarez, his staff, and our foreign language teachers for their work on this adoption. And now I would like to show you just a few data points of information for the adoption. For the K-12 world language adoption, our needs assessment included 78 teachers, 19 administrators, and 114 parents. Committee members, if we look at the last adoption, in 2010, we had 14 schools and 36 teachers. Today, we had 27 schools and 61 teachers. Remember, we have about 225 foreign language teachers for the district, so that's a large number. We have 201 evaluation responses. Next one. And these are the actual materials. We have 9 languages going on in the county, and we're adopting materials for all of those. And now I'm available for questions, should you have any.
Are there any questions? All right. All right, go back to the last slide.
Can you go back to the last slide, Dr. Ewing?
Yes, sir.
Those languages, the numbers correspond, is that the grade they're taught in?
No, well, those are the levels. So for Spanish, it might say 1 through 3. That would mean Spanish 1, 2, 3 in high school. Under Portuguese, when I see Ponto de Encuentro, 1 through 4 would mean levels 1 through 4 of Portuguese. Portuguese 1, Portuguese 2, Portuguese 3, Portuguese 4.
I was just curious if Chinese and Japanese and German are offered in all of our high schools?
No, sir. I don't have the specifics in front of me here. German is offered in 5 locations. Chinese is offered in conjunction with a grant we have with the Confucius Institute at Kennesaw State University. I believe we have Chinese in 6 schools now, and we have Japanese in 2 of our high schools.
Mr. Wheeler, too, you bring up a good point, because that I can't pass up the opportunity to jump in here and say that that's going to be a perfect example, and one example we've used numerous times on the distance learning technology that we're installing in all the high schools. So if we, because all high schools can't afford an allotment, for example, for a Chinese teacher, when they only have 1 or 2 students that would be interested in taking that class. But with the distance learning technology, we can have 1 teacher at 1 high school teaching up to all 16 high schools concurrently. So it's going to be an amazing endeavor that we'll be rolling out. We've already installed it, but we'll be rolling it out, implementing it this fall.
Are there any other questions? All right. Dr. Ewing, thank you very much for your report. We appreciate it and all the work that went into this adoption process. So, all right, moving that to discussion agenda. Understand we need to break for lunch now. Y'all probably picked up I'm not that big on breaks and things, but we need to go ahead and break for lunch. So
Keep going.
I would probably keep going, right. But anyway, we'll break for lunch, and do you think an hour? Will that cover us for executive session? Do you think, or is that cutting it too short?
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, let's say 12:15. 12:15, all right. All All right, do we have a motion to, all right, Mr. Sweeney? Oh, sorry. Yes.
Madam Chair, I make a recommendation that we adjourn to executive session to discuss land and personnel items.
Okay, and seconded. Okay, all in favor? We are adjourned at this time for executive session. All right, thank you. One more item on our agenda, and that is number 6. Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask our Chief Financial Officer, Brad Johnson, to come forward again and bring us the recommendation for adoption of the final budget for FY 2017.
Vice Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent, today's budget presentation again marks a continuation of the development of the 2017 Cobb County School District budget. The Financial Services Division has been working on the 2017 budget since October of last year. We have received input from many levels of the organization. Once again, preparing a budget is essentially a prioritization of limited resources, and today we are pleased to present a balanced tentative budget proposal to the board for consideration. On April 13th and April 28th, Financial Services presented a review of the 17 budget to the board, and as you will recall, these presentations included an executive summary of the budget proposal, which I do have at your desk today. And we also distributed a range of financial detail for review, both in hard copy and on the internet. As we continue to proceed through the 17 budget process, our budget department will continuously update the budget website with all information presented to the board. A few comments on the budget calendar. Earlier this morning, we had a budget public forum that was conducted to receive input on the budget. And one other item on the calendar, the final budget approval is scheduled for May 19th. Some comments about the 17 budget, and we've expressed these before, but just let me hit the highlights if you would. Some revenue comments. Property tax revenue has been estimated by the Cobb County Tax Assessor. We will not know the final digest numbers until late in June, but at this time we do have an estimate from them, and they're estimating around 6% growth, or $19.8 million. The state of Georgia quality basic education revenue, or as we call it QBE, has increased by $33 million. This is a positive development, but I do have comments that fully explain the state revenue. The additional funding provides a 3% teacher salary increase on the state salary schedule. But because Cobb pays more than the state, the money the state provides equates to only a 2.5% raise on the Cobb salary schedule. Furthermore, another revenue topic, the state of Georgia further reduced the austerity budget reductions from our current cut of $28 million to a continued cut next year of $10 million. The economic downturn in the economy has turned around, so from a financial perspective, we are hoping that they will once again, hopefully eliminate the austerity cuts next year. The local fair share reduction from the state QBE funding formula increased by $4 million, from $132 million to $136 million. On the expenditure side, the 2017 budget proposal contains several main things, and here are the highlights. It contains a full step increase for all eligible employees. An average step increase is approximately 1.5%. It also contains a 2.5% raise for all eligible employees. It includes an increased cost for health care for classified employees. And it also includes a usage of $10 million in fund balance. In summary, the 2017 budget, the tentative budget that has been presented previously and today, is the result of many hours of hard work by administration and employees of the school district. The district will always have needs that outnumber our financial resources to address those needs, but we feel that resources have been applied on a prioritized basis. We respectfully submit the FY 2017 tentative budget for your continued review and comments today, and as I stated previously, we are scheduled for final approval on May the 19th. So, Madam Chair, these are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any comments? Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things. In our utilities, we're reducing our estimated expenditures by $1.5 million. I hope we have some buffer built into the remaining number in case fluctuation does occur in the cost of utilities?
We have looked at those accounts and we feel like we're okay. It's going to be a little bit tighter, but we feel like we'll be okay.
Okay, now, we have, what, 3, maybe 4 vendors for electricity? Do we renew those contracts every year, or are they on a multi-year basis?
I'd probably have to get some help on that. We just pay the bills, but I'm sure they review the vendors. And in some cases, maybe you have to go with a certain electricity vendor,
Because I
depending
understand,
on where you live.
and speaking with Mr. Carlson, there's variance in the rates that each company charges. So, those could fluctuate also if we are renewing every year or every 3 years, whatever. That would affect this number also.
I appreciate your comment, and as far as the flexibility, we feel like we can handle it, but.
Okay. Now, the other question I have is 692. How is that being funded, and what are we paying out of 692 now?
Fund 692?
Fund code 692.
Fund 692 is workers' comp fund, I believe.
Well, self-insurance and so forth, yeah.
Self-insurance. And what we do is we have employer reductions or employer withholding. And it's an employer cost, not an employee cost. And we do that in association with each position we have. And so that in turn, that is the revenue for that fund. And then in turn, we're able to pay the workers' comp claims as well as general liability.
Okay.
So
Now,
that's the inflows and the outflows.
at one time, we were paying our legal fees out of that 692 account. Is that still?
I don't think we are anymore.
We're taking out of the general fund?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
That was a point I didn't realize. So on the withholding for that, for the portion for the self-insurance, is that part of our benefits costs when we're figuring in salaries? We look at it like that?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Okay,
'Cause
great.
you have employee
Yeah.
benefits and then employer-paid benefits.
Absolutely.
That's one of those.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnson, a quick question relative to the charter school line item here. I noticed the increase to roughly $1.4 million and based on FTE. Was there a change in the weighting of funds per FTE going to charter schools? Or, I mean, it seems like a fairly substantial increase.
Well, and y'all correct me if I get out of line here, but there's not a lot of preciseness that goes into the FTE forecasts. And we actually front the charter schools, the funds up front, so that that benefits them because they have the funds up front to operate on. But at midterm, sometimes there is an adjustment because the FTE that they forecasted did not come to fruition. So in that regard, then that money is adjusted because they are funded, even though the money comes through us, they are funded based on FTE. So they're held to the same standards that we are. So just as when our FTE grows, we get additional funds from the state, but that's done from the count. Their money is also tied to that same count, but they forecast. So they have a little bit, y'all correct me if I'm wrong now, but they have a little bit more flexibility in that we fund them up front because we front the money, but then it's adjusted on the back end, if you will. So I don't think that the FTE is adjusted, but, I mean, the per FTE cost has adjusted, but they could be forecasting growth at one or both of the schools. Does that make sense? It kind of made sense to me as I'm saying it, but I don't know if it still made sense.
Another part of that explanation is that as the property digest, charter schools, there's a very specific formula in how they receive state funding, and we go right by that formula, and the main metric for that is student counts. But the other part of the charter school formula is local revenue from our district. And so when the property digest goes up, they get a higher percentage, and that's that plays into part of the increase as well.
Okay, has there been I guess more specifically, has there been a recent change in the, I guess, the weight or the funding formula specifically for charter schools, or has that remained static?
That's static.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the austerity cuts, how does that affect the FTE funding for charter schools? Or does it have an effect?
Well, that plays into it as well.
So, the more money we get in from the state, that means more for the FTE, per FTE, so that will be part of this increase in cost.
Yeah, changes in state funding and austerity, that'll change the amount they get as well.
Okay.
Because we pass it right on, either higher or lower.
Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to have Mr. Johnson introduce his budget staff. They're here at almost every meeting when we're talking about budget, so if you would take the opportunity to introduce your staff that has contributed to what we're fixing to do, yes, I'm sorry, that we're fixing to discuss today.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Banks. We would like to think that we have the best budget department in the entire Cobb County School District. And our staff, our director is Mandy Wissing, and our manager, David Baker, and our manager, Becky Beck.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Banks, for being the conscience of the board. We appreciate that. We were not properly recognizing those people that give so much and people we rely on so much, so we appreciate all this. All right, Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One more quick just observation. And you had covered this, and I just really want to maybe have you just comment on it again, just for the viewing public. In the governor's budget, one of the things that you'll hear the governor referencing, or people from his office referencing, is that a 3% raise is being built into the state funding formula, and yet what we're representing here is a 2.5%. And I know the reasons for the delta, but many of the people watching may not be aware of why we're at 2.5% versus 3% that the governor is suggesting. Can you briefly touch on that?
Yes, sir. There is a state salary schedule for teachers, and their salary schedule is lower than ours. And so we pay more, and so the equivalent percentage for us is 3% on the state salary schedule, but 2.5% on ours because we pay more.
Thank you.
So do we have a recommendation for this item? Mr. Sweeney?
I would be inclined to have this move to the consent agenda item because things have gone so well with this budget process. But having an understanding of that we need to keep this open, I think we need to keep this open at least to have this as a discussion item on our agenda.
Thank you. And Mr. Banks seconds. Thank you. So we'll place that on our discussion agenda. Thank you, Mr. Johnson and your staff. We appreciate it. Okay. Yeah, we did not reconvene. Sorry, I tend to just jump right in and start things, and I mouthed to Denise earlier. We did not reconvene, so please consider us reconvened. Thank you. All right, that brings us to the personnel report. Mr. Axtell?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask John Adams to bring us items requiring action following executive session.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm pleased to present the Human Resources Personnel Report for May 11th, 2016. The administration recommends the approval of the identified employment actions of those individuals listed on the Personnel Action Report and as amended in the addendum as discussed in executive session. We do have a number of principal level and higher position recommendations today. We recommend Dennis Campbell, recommended to be rehired as a 49% Director of Planning, SPLOS Management. Pamela Dingle, recommend that you accept her resignation as Director of Title I in the Academic Division, effective July 1. Dr. Ashley Hosey, recommended for reassignment to Principal at Pittner Elementary School, effective July 1. Chris Salter, recommended for appointment to Principal at Smith Middle School, effective July 1. And Dr. Lisa O. Williams, currently at Barber Middle School as principal, recommended for reassignment to Performance Management Coordinator in Human Resources, effective July 1 of 2016. And this concludes the personnel report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Adams. We have a motion. Mr. Sweeney?
Make a motion that we accept the superintendent's personnel action report as presented.
Mr. Banks seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Oh, sorry, Mr. Scanmore has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be real quick. Mr. Adams, what percentage of full employment are from full employment are we with all the hiring and teachers and everybody?
I couldn't give you an exact percentage. We still do have a couple of hundred positions currently posted that we will have hired by the beginning of the school year. As of this morning, we've already hired about approximately 500 new teachers and also about 100 or more internal transfers, plus another 100 or so classified employees. But by the first day of school, as always, we will be at 99 point something fully employed.
That wasn't meant to be a gotcha. I just wanted to get a trend. And then second, I know you mentioned yesterday how many years total of retirees, that we were losing. How many numbers of people did we retire yesterday?
Well, we had 221 attend the retirement luncheon, which went very well. And I think we had 349 or 348 who were eligible to retire. And I believe the total number of years represented at the luncheon was 4,624.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, none opposed. All right, thank you. Okay. Now, do we have a motion to approve our agenda for our board meeting? Mr. Scammahorn, so moves. Second. Mr. Morgan, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, that brings us to board remarks. Mr. Wheeler, let's start with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Got a lengthy little thing here today. Recently had board discussions on parent involvement. I would like to shout out or commend the parents of Post 7. In the past week, I've had the chance to see clear evidence of this in our schools out there. In particular, at Hillgrove with the Taste of West Cobb, at Varner Elementary with the work of the School Foundation with Robert Lee, in particular in the building of their new track. At Ford Elementary with the Evening in the Garden with their art show and choral thing and all the stuff that goes on around that school. I was at Harrison High School last night with the girls' soccer game and the boys' baseball games playing in the state tournament. You can see a lot of positive parental involvement in giving their time and their supporting of the kids to make their schools better places. There's a lot of good things happening out there daily, and like I say, I'd like to commend the parents in that area for the things that are doing to make those schools better. In concluding, I'll congratulate the CCRPI top performance schools of Kemp, Ford, Harrison, and Hillgrove. We got great jobs being done by the school administration, the staff, the kids themselves, and the community. And like I say, we got a lot of good things happening out there. Well done.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan? All right. Well, first of all, yesterday we had a wonderful luncheon for our retirees, and many thanks to all of those people who have dedicated so many years to our school system, and you've definitely made an improvement in everything that we've done. So we appreciate you and all of the service, including Dr. Huff. We will miss you. But again, congratulations to each of you as you enter a new phase of life, and thank you for everything you've done for our school system. Also wanted to look at the CCRPI scores and congratulate our number one and most improved in each category. Elementary is Nickajack Elementary, middle is Lindley 6th grade, and high school is Osborne. Those are the most improved schools in each one of the categories, but also Osborne has the highest 5-year gain in graduation rate they have increased by 22%. So obviously, lots of good things going on out there, too. So know everybody's busy getting toward the end of the year, but thanks for everything you do to make a difference for us. Thanks. Mr. Banks.
Well, I'm going to brag also. I want to congratulate Dr. Chris Ritchie at Leicester High School, who is the principal, and his staff, who have made Leicester #1 for the second year in the CCRPI. And also Pope High School, who is the principal is Robert Downs, and his staff for being in the top 4 high schools. I also want to congratulate Hightower Middle School, Laura Montgomery, who is the principal, and her staff. And also Maybury, principal is Mary Lee Heflin. And also Elizabeth Mavity at Eastside Elementary School and her staff. And congratulations to Kyle Giesler at Garrison Mill Elementary School and his staff. And also congratulations to Lynn Hamlet at Murdoch Elementary School and her staff. And also for all the students for making our CCRPI one of the best in the state. These kids, these students are what made it happen. So congratulations to them and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the, it seems like there's a theme here with the CCRPI, but to my earlier comments, of the schools, high schools having enrollment of greater than 1,000, Cobb County schools captured 4 of the top 5 places, and those 5 schools being Lassiter, Walton, Hillgrove, and Pope, respectively. It's very, very clear that the teachers, the administration, and the students are doing an outstanding job, and we thank them. For Wheeler High School, I want to thank State School Superintendent Richard Woods, Superintendent for attending, Mr. Banks was there as well, for attending the recertification for STEM certification for Wheeler High School. It's the first school within the state to receive their recertification, and I know that they're actively pursuing a STEAM type program that would include the fine arts into the science, technology, engineering, and math programs as well. Also like to congratulate them on second place finish in the Lockheed Coding Challenge. More than 40 teams participated in the Coding Challenge, and Wheeler's ROTC also achieved the Outstanding Unit Award, which is another nice accolade for that particular school. Walton High School, 2 kudos. #1, Lady Raiders as the state tennis champions. And then secondly, men's baseball team swept Lambert and is now in the state semifinals. So we wish them much success. And then Dickerson Middle School, one of the things that was done yesterday during the retirement luncheon was percussion entertainment provided by the Dickerson Middle School Band under the leadership of Scott Brown, and we thank them for that. And most importantly, with the primaries coming up, please get out and vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That band was excellent. It really was. Thank you. All right. Mr. Scammahorn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I promise I'll be much shorter. I just wanted to congratulate the staff, and Mr. Parker has been doing an excellent job with our SPLOS. He's been on top of things, at least I don't know about others. I assume he treats me equally like everybody else, but he keeps us informed and is moving and grooving, as we used to say. The other folks, Dr. Huff, Dr. Davis, doing a great job. Dr. Hewing, fantastic. I wish I could do half with numbers that you do. Mr. Adams, fantastic. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is things are changing rapidly in education. The old ways are no longer available to us. We're no longer able to use what we used to use. And these folks are are adapting and changing. The state is requiring us to do things that we didn't have to do in years and decades past. And then I intentionally left one gentleman out that I'll call out now. Dr. Rivera, you are an outstanding individual. We are pleased to have you. We're privileged to have you on this staff. You are doing fantastic things in the positions that you've held within Cobb County. And I know you're going to do great things in the Chief of Staff position. And this district would suffer without you. And I want to let you know that. And Mr. Superintendent, thank you for putting just stellar, outstanding people that can do lots of different things in other organizations if they wanted to, and we're blessed to have them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Banks would like to add something.
I forgot to announce one important thing that happened at Pope High School. They were certified by the county for their STEM school. So Pope High School is now a Cobb County certified STEM school.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Skidmore, were you saying you forgot something also?
Yes, thank you. If you get a chance, shake a cop's hand or take him or her to lunch once in a while, because without them, we'd be in chaos. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Ragsdale, we will end with your comments.
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank Max Bacon, Mayor Smyrna. We attended his Smyrna Mayor's Award, where he recognizes the Teacher of the Year, the Volunteer of the Year at each of the Smyrna schools. And it's just a tremendous ceremony that brings a lot of attention to the volunteers, and especially the hard work the teachers do as well. And he also recognizes the student that has been nominated from the school. I also spoke to the counselors, recognizing them, and they just do a tremendous job at what they do, which is not the easiest nor most positive all the time job some of the things that they have to contend with. So I want to give a shout out to them and show our appreciation to them. I also want to express appreciation and congratulations to Wheelers, Mr. Sweeney said, on receiving the recertification from the state on STEM. We had the ceremony was in the new Performing Arts Center, and it was full of students, which was awesome. And to hear what some of the students that are graduating are able to do at their level, which is, we heard from some of the seniors talk about how they thought they wanted to do this, but after they have been in the magnet program and had experience and been exposed to some career paths, they've changed their mind. One young lady, a senior, decided that she wanted to go into business rather than be a surgeon. And I'm sure she could have done either one that she wanted to. So it's just a tremendous opportunity for those students to be able to have that experience and be able to start on their career path a leg up. I would have loved to have had that opportunity as well. And finally, the retirement luncheon yesterday was a tremendous event, as always. I think we as a district go above and beyond to recognize our groups of individuals, especially in times like this with the retirement. And it was just a tremendous honor for all our retirees, and Angela will be sorely missed. It's one of those things where we wish you well, but we're definitely sorry to see you go. Definitely left an impact. I think you have done just about everything in this district. You started out in another district and figured out that was not the best place to be in and came to Cobb. And so remained there a long time. And another thing that I would like to say that I was not able to say yesterday during the luncheon, because it was after the fact when I realized that, but as we had all the retirees stand, there was a significant number, and I would say the majority of the retirees, the majority of 221 retirees had spent over 25 years of their career in Cobb. And that is just something you don't see today, is loyalty to an organization for a long term. That used to be a given. That used to be the norm. but not so much today. And that just speaks a lot to how great Cobb is, and to our district priority. We want to make Cobb the best place to teach, lead, and learn. And that's just a testament to that happening. So, thank you.
Is there any other business concerns? All right, without any objection, then we will be adjourned. Okay, thank you.